Chloe Zhao's new film Hamnet is receiving uniform praise, with 5-star reviews everywhere, the masses engaging in group catharsis, ravings about performances, and even the word masterpiece being thrown around. Personally, I've been more moved by The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Hi, my name is Ethel. Welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things film. As always, the following will be my opinion, and if you disagree with me on any of the points I make, feel free to sound off in the comments, but I'm mainly making this video to comfort those that are equally confused about how the general consensus on this film is so one note. Without further ado, let's get into it. So, Hamnet is a 2025 film directed by Chloe Zhao of Nomadland fame, starring Jessie Buckley as Agnes, Paul Mescal as Will, Joe Alwyn, and Emily Watson. The film is based on a 2020 novel by Maggie O'Farrell of the same name. It's a historical fiction following the lives of William Shakespeare and his wife Anne Hathaway, and focuses on the birth and death of their son and how that eventually contributes to the bard's creation of probably one of the most famous plays of all time, post-Greek tragedies, pre-modern classics, Hamlet. First, let's talk about the film's merits. Jessie Buckley's acting in this is insane. What we can imagine to be extremely agonizing scenes, the death of a child, but also childbirth ×2. She acts very well in, it's very convincing, and this is also Zhao's forte. She's very good at creating and cultivating raw and intimate scenes. Second merit would be, for me personally, seeing the recreation of the globe in such immersive terms, and part of that is thanks to the cinematographer Zhao. He worked on The Zone of Interest, which I loved. I wasn't actually that in love with the cinematography across the film, but in certain areas it worked well. Another thing I liked was the sound design by Johnny Byrne. Particularly in the woodland kind of forest scenes, you could hear the tree branches knocking off each other and swaying, or you could hear the mud being trenched upon. And I thought that was done very well, particularly in the first maybe third of the film. It was very immersive, and I was still kind of locked in at that point. I was still kind of ready for this to be a good film. Also worth noting that the score was done by Max Richter. He's extremely prolific in the composing world, and he used authentic Renaissance folkloric instruments for making the score on this one, even though I do believe the majority of the score to be something that he made years prior, and we'll get back to that point later in my review. But just to kind of quote him on his intentions when building this world, he wanted to create a background radiation to the score with choral voices of women, no men, and he said it's like this amniotic fluid that holds the imagined world of ours. So interesting to see the level of consideration that he was giving to what would be the meditations of the film and the tone as well. So yeah, good to know, and I can't argue that it was thought out. Honourable mention as well to the two child actors, the one that played Little Hamnet and the onstage Hamlet. It was cute finding out that they're brothers in real life, and as child actors go, I thought that they did a pretty good job. So the combination of all of these very talented people's efforts comes together to simulate very, very emotionally charged scenes of childbirth and the loss of life, anguish and agony in some scenes. And so people having an emotional response to that is so understandable, particularly if they've been touched by grief. I imagine even more so if they've lost a child. I can completely understand why something like this film would have brought you to tears. But for me, it just didn't land. And I think that's due to a number of factors, which I would like to discuss. So the film was written by Chloe Zhao in collaboration with Maggie O'Farrell, and by all accounts, it's very true to the original text. As far as I know, Maggie O'Farrell has a very sick child, and so she wrote this book as a way to process the fear of losing that child. And I'm sure that that's what the book functions as for a lot of people. It's well written, it's an emotional meditation. I can't stop saying that word, I'm sorry. But what I struggle with is this. The life and times of William Shakespeare and his wife Anne Hathaway have been chronicled many's a time, whether it be modern film adaptations such as Shakespeare in Love, All Is True, or Anonymous, or a play from the early 20th century like Will Shakespeare by Clemence Dane. Much has been done to understand and even imagine what the life and times of William Shakespeare looked like. A little bit of a sidebar, but I mentioned the Clemence Dane play not only to illustrate how long-standing the urge and the effort to want to understand and fictionalize William Shakespeare's life has been, but also because I came across the play in a really natural way. I received this book for Christmas from someone in my life who knows that I at one stage had an interest in the stage, and little did they know I was actually trying to develop my film critic skills, so it was kind of like serendipitous to get this. But anyway, the play looks at the bard's life and times, his relationships, his struggles, his triumphs, and apparently it has like a very rich historical context for Elizabethan era England. So in this book is a criticism of the play Will Shakespeare, and it's interesting because what this guy, St. John Irvine, critiques the play for is something that I take issue with in Hamnet as well. In his criticism, he says, Miss Dane bases her assertions on the very feminine assumption that a thing must have happened because there is nothing to prove that it didn't. Now, crazy to use feminine assumption there. God knows the levels of like patronizing that are going on. But I do think it highlights something. When the history isn't so solid to be drawn upon, it definitely gives authors, playwrights, filmmakers a bit more creative license. But I think that the creative liberty in attributing a cause of death to young Hamnet and projecting sentimentality into the way that Shakespeare crafted his work by associating the real life boy with the Prince of Denmark Hamlet is very weak. It misses the mark, and it potentially misinforms audiences as well, because as we know, Shakespeare didn't even conceive of the plot of Hamlet or the name. The play is based on a Scandinavian legend that was made 300 years before the Elizabethan era, and the name Hamlet is found in previously staged versions where oral retellings would have had the name Amleth changed to Hamlet. Not to mention that anyone familiar with this play, it being probably the most famous play ever made, would be questioning where the sentimentality is supposed to be drawn between the death of this real life little boy and the loss of his innocence in that way, and then connecting that and associating that with the character of Hamlet. This was like jumping out at me the whole time once the association was made on screen. Hamlet is a deeply flawed, morally ambiguous character. He's narcissistic and he is known to torment and abuse the women on stage. Now, was there method in the madness? That's the debate, but I'm confused as to where this like gorgeous sentimentality, the catharsis of art and the creation of the art, the connection between William Shakespeare and Agnes, where I'm supposed to find like the beauty in that. Hamlet is a great and complex play, and here it just feels inappropriately linked to this little boy's death, but also it feels like it's neatly packaged up into this like coping mechanism for a grieving father, which I think reduces the power of the play. Imagine for a second we were to embrace the premise, as weak as I deem it to be. I'm not anti-historical fiction. I understand that you do have to kind of suspend your disbelief or even your contextual knowledge about the history, the significance of it, the cultural significance, and the text itself. I'm not anti making up stories in an effort to say something else, but even if we were to embrace it, I think what would have been a much more interesting angle would be to investigate Will and Agnes's relationship dynamic and then have it mirrored with the onstage characters in the play Hamlet. There's lots of paradoxes of power in Hamlet, and it leads to his inaction. That's like the fundamental thing about him, which maybe we could have seen in Will's approach to literary pursuits, or even more interestingly, it could have touched on the woman's role in late 16th century England and the treatment of Ophelia and Gertrude, for example. If I were to have seen something even just slightly more complicated linked or dramatized at the end of the film, I think I would have been a lot more happy with the end product. Just to reiterate, I'm not a Shakespeare supremacist. I really don't need my historical fiction to be completely historically accurate. I just think that the premise is hinged upon a very weak notion about historical significance and prestigious drama. And maybe that was done in the hopes to make you feel like you were watching something that was historically significant or prestigious. One of the biggest reasons that I left my screening annoyed was because I felt like the film was manipulative in a way that just didn't relent, and it was so one note. Here is a brutal snapshot of what it would be like to lose a child. Now cry. Lots of reviews I've read have focused on the same fundamental flaw of the film's storytelling, and they've used the same descriptor. The film is emotionally manipulative, and the tears were not earned. It's not a complete sin for a film to want to tug on the heartstrings, but with Hamnet, it just lacked on so many levels. The characters weren't well developed, and I didn't really care as I normally would do seeing people put through hardship on screen like that. Also, the scenes tended to linger on with cuts to a black screen during multiple heavy emotional climaxes, and those scenes, sometimes they contained low-key histrionic performances from the actors that I can't even blame them for because the writing was so poor, and I will go through a few examples. Whether it was seeing Will upset at writer's block, the dialogue between him and Agnes just going on and on about how hard it was for him to write it, and her constant comforts, it was so repetitive and it just lingered on so long. Or references to Shakespeare's work, him writing Romeo and Juliet after a romantic moment between him and Agnes, or the children's play acting as the Macbeth sisters. Even if you like the film, surely you can agree that that one scene where Will considers suicide, he asks the single most famous line in any play ever written, where Hamlet contemplates existence. To be or not to be, that is the question. That just takes me out of it instantly because it just feels silly and unserious. It just feels a little bit like Marvel Easter eggs, and Zhao can actually be quoted as saying Shakespeare is the ultimate IP, which I have a very neutral opinion on that take, but I think maybe that informs us a little bit of how she sees Shakespeare's work, and I think that maybe it could have been referenced in the film with a bit more subtlety, and I would have been less likely to disengage and cringe. Calling back to the start of the video where I said that I have been in the past more moved by scenes from reality TV, I do think that an interesting comparison between Hamnet and reality TV can be made, because when I'm watching reality TV, I'm almost painfully aware of the parameters of it. The producers are making up storylines, the music is designed to make me feel a certain way, and yet, however contrived a given reality TV scene is, and however fictionalized the storylines are, I have been moved by the sad circumstances that people find themselves in. But with Hamnet, I think what I find most... Hi, my SD card ran out of storage in the middle of filming this, and in the process of switching over and having to delete some things, I forgot to finish the point I was making. I believe I was juxtaposing Hamnet with reality TV. This for me was the most egregious aspect of Hamnet. I felt like its attempts to elicit emotion from us as an audience were very, very contrived, and it lacked so much subtlety in a lot of areas. And in that way, I think it might as well have been reality TV, and yet I've been more moved by scenes from reality TV where I'm cognizant of how much they're trying to move me. Everything from this film's tone, its acclaimed cast, its links to Shakespeare, and its attempts to say something profound about loss, it just all went womp womp for me because it was trying so hard. It insisted upon itself, if you will. Towards the end of the film, I was ready to have my reservations relax a little bit when we get this gorgeous shot of all of the audience members reaching out to Hamlet on stage. And then Max Richter's on the nature of daylight kicks in. And I didn't even know the title of the score or of the composition, but I've heard it in so many things, from Arrival, The Handmaid's Tale, Shutter Island, The Last of Us, and even EastEnders. It was a piece originally written in response to the Iraq War, and it's employed here again, apparently because Jessie Buckley just suggested it to the director. I mean, that's nice, but it took me out of the film once again, because I was like, oh, classic. This piece is going to movie, of course. If you'll allow me to get just a little bit tinfoil hat, I've written a little piece here about how the film industrial complex commodifies and markets films to be these artistic and important and depthful things. But then when you see that Spielberg and Sam Mendes are on the production team, it kind of maybe gives you an idea of how the film is going to be used to appeal to and be pushed to American audiences. And so with that, it's giving Oscar bait. But I'm sure there's people that still believe in, awarding bodies and film institutions like that, and that it's a meritocracy. But for me, I think with it being Oscar bait, that kind of backs up my theory about how much this film tries to move you. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Just for me, the efforts were so contrived that what is supposed to be this like gorgeous piece of cinema doesn't really feel that way. It just feels like manipulative. Finally, moving away from analysing how the film was crafted and a little bit more about the film's meaning, because at the end of the day, that's a big part of why we recommend and review films so highly. I was sent a Substack article from a friend, Irla, exploring the pose of concern for the neglected and forgotten women. It's an article by Emma Tranter, and in it she asks if popularised feminist retellings, many by Margaret Atwood, do more harm than good. So Tranter notes a trend in the 2010s fiction where women started to be portrayed as quirky and thus othered from more normal traits associated with women in an attempt to be endeared by them and root for them. This trend was seen as a feminist depiction of women because up until that point, it was deviating from how women were classically portrayed in literature and film, and also kind of bent our ideas of womanhood, motherhood, and domesticity. Within Hamnet, we have a huge focus on Agnes, and it is somewhat of a subversion of the classic Shakespeare life piece, focusing on the woman behind the man. She's also witchy and connected to nature. She's defiant. She's in red, and even the colour theory isn't very subtle. But this actually inadvertently makes us less interested in the stories of regular women. Hamnet, being a period piece set in Elizabethan era England, would have seen women a lot more restricted by society and the church and their husbands. So to project these modern personality traits onto a woman of this time is to be fantastical. And I'm not anti-fantastical, but like with a lot of recent retellings, and as Tranter touches on in her Substack article, these things have an compounding effect on the way that we erase the oppression of women over time. When Maggie O'Farrell's book came out in 2020, it was hugely popular and widely praised for being a feminist retelling. In the face of years and years of male scholarship on Shakespeare being so misogynistic in how they remember Anne Hathaway, Maggie O'Farrell wants to offer a different portrayal of the woman. In the book, Will is unidentified as Shakespeare until the very end, and so this allows us to focus on Agnes and her inner world a bit more. But I think there's a real false sense of this being a refreshing angle, unfortunately, as it relies on some really antiquated and bioessentialist ideas about male and female spheres. Where Will excels in literary pursuits, Agnes is spiritually rooted in nature, and she's confronting death and possessing mystical intuition. This kind of portrayal detracts from the real-life power that Anne Hathaway had in navigating a world post her husband's success. Last year, a letter was discovered by a Bristol academic named Matthew Stegall, and in it reveals that she was actually financially literate and an urbane woman. So a more ordinary outcome for Anne Hathaway, yes, but a more impressive achievement to have yielded such power in those days. I know which portrayal of feminist insight appeals to me more. It's not wrong to portray her in that way per se. Feminism is a minefield. I appreciate Maggie O'Farrell's interest in wanting to combat all of the misogyny in the way that Anne Hathaway was talked about for years and years and years. However, like I said, it just kind of touches on the same things that we always see associated with women, and it's inadvertently sexist. Back to the Substack. Tranter notes that the women in Hamnet make for good secondary characters subverting expectations with surprising depth and empathy, but they do not drive or carry a plot. They are not protagonists. So, to wrap up, some think that this story seeks to highlight the invisible labour that women do at this time, showing the importance of Agnes's role in childbearing, rearing, healing, and housekeeping. But if you think about it, it also kind of frames her suffering without the support of her husband as something unfortunate but necessary in the making of great art. So, to conclude, this film didn't work for me on a number of levels. It just didn't feel natural. I think it had so much potential and it was really just hollow and contrived. That was my experience. I just felt very alone in it because the response online and even in my screening was to see everyone very moved by something. And that's okay. I mean, I'm not trying to say that the vast majority of people are wrong in how they feel. However, I do think that it could have been thought through a bit more and given more consideration to appreciating the original text of Shakespeare. Again, I am not a Shakespeare supremacist, nor am I an academic. Ultimately, I think Hamnet failed because it was too confident in its authority about directing sadness in an aesthetic way, and it kind of presents it with cultural prestige, and so then it automatically becomes meaningful. This video for me and my research and just talking through how I felt about the film was a way to feel a bit less alone. As much as I would love to have liked it, I actually had a very visceral reaction to it and I did not like it. So please let me know what you think of my thoughts, my review. Again, it's just my opinion. If it doesn't resonate with you, then do not worry. I'm not trying to change your mind. I forgot to say thank you for watching. Like, subscribe. If you liked the video, let me know. And if you didn't like the video, let me know. This is my second ever video, review or otherwise. And I kind of want to keep doing this. It's like really enjoyable to me. It's become a big preoccupation of mine outside of a full-time job. So if you can support me, please do in any way. Yeah, thank you for watching.